Hi, it's Chad from Winning Tennis here, and in this video I want to talk about the serve. Is it possible for you to serve the ball 100 miles per hour, 110 miles per hour, even more? For the average club player, I would say no. You're not going to be serving 110 to 120 miles per hour like the pros because they practice. From the time they're small to the time they're teenagers and beyond, they're constantly practicing. They're the cream of the crop, the best of the best. They have the fast twitch muscle fibers. They pronate, they have the right timing, they jump in. Now that doesn't mean that you can't develop a great serve. A great serve for you might be 100 miles an hour, or it might top out at 105. For me, I think it's somewhere between 100 and 110. So if I can consistently serve my first serve about 105 miles an hour on average, I'm very happy with that. For a club player, it's not realistic to want to serve 120 miles an hour and actually accomplish that. So what really makes somebody serve fast? It's not just fast, but it's also accuracy. You want to get at least 60% of your serves in. If you're just getting half your serves, 40% of your serves, you're relying too much on your second serve, and your second serve is generally going to be a lot weaker than your first serve, and you're going to be more in a defensive position. But if you're an able-bodied person, especially if you're a male and you don't have any problems with your joints or your shoulders, you should be able to serve 100 miles an hour. If you serve and the ball hits inside the box and hits the fence on one bounce, typically the ball is going about 100 miles an hour. That's a good barometer. To develop a truly great serve, I believe you need to put hours in over months and years. It doesn't really happen in a matter of weeks. You're not going to come out, take a tennis lesson once a week for an hour with an instructor and have an amazing serve. It really depends on you. You have to go out to the practice court with a ball, with a hopper, and you have to hit, maybe 300, 400, 500 serves, and then come back, do it again the next day. And maybe a couple of days later, maybe the next day after that, maybe 3 days after that. Really be consistent. And you have to make sure you're doing the right things. It really depends on, like I said, a few things. So with that said, let's take a look at a couple of the students or 3 of the students that I've taught the serve to and see if they can hit the ball 100 miles per hour. Okay, so the first student up is an older gentleman, and I'll refrain from saying their names, but he had a pretty good technique here. He does a great job of bringing the racket up to the side here. He gets into a pinpoint stance, but if you notice, he brings his, I believe it's right foot a little too far ahead. He's actually in the pinpoint and then he goes even further. That was a mistake. Now, once his hand goes up, he kind of drops his hand a little too soon. And he does get somewhat of a decent racket drop. He brings the racket behind his head, and he does pronate. He actually does a pretty good job of pronating. So he's doing a few things right. He's almost got the pinpoint right. He's bringing his racket up in the right manner. He's getting that racket drop, and he's pronating, and he's still only hitting the ball maybe 75 miles an hour, maybe 80 miles an hour tops. I'll give him 80 on the high side. The ball, you could see, bounced twice before it got to the fence. So why is it? Why is it that he has fairly decent technique? I'm not saying perfect, but I've seen a lot worse, but he has fairly decent technique, and he's still serving at 75, 80 miles per hour. Well, the reason is athleticism. He may not be exploding into the court with his legs. His arm may not be moving fast enough. He may not be snapping his wrist. There are various factors that account for speed or pace in the ball. It's not just, okay, I'm doing this technique, I got my racket drop. I see a lot of people that do a nice racket drop and they pronate and the ball is going 80, 85, maybe 90 miles an hour when it should be going 110 when you consider the technique is good. Why is that? Well, look at his age. This is a gentleman in his 60s, may have various injuries. So that's the reason. If you're an older person, unless you were trained younger and you always had a good serve, you're probably not going to develop a serve in the hundreds. Okay, so that's an unrealistic expectation. Your goal should be to get the ball in, whatever your potential is, get the ball in at your highest potential. That might be 80 miles an hour, but if you can get 70% of your serves in at 80 miles per hour, that's a lot better than trying to hit a 100-mile-an-hour serve and never getting any of them in. Okay, so we have to kind of reassign our values and our goals when it comes to tennis, because I think we watch the pros, we get spoiled, and we think, oh, if they could do it, I could do it. You know, I saw a couple of women come out the other day, and you could see they never played tennis, and they were hitting the ball, and you know, the ball was all over the place. You can imagine what it looks like when beginners play tennis. And they're like, well, Serena makes it look so easy. Yeah, but Serena was practicing 3 to 4 hours a day, every day from the time that she was 6. You know, that's a big difference. Okay, let's take a look at the next gentleman. And we can see here that he also has some fairly good technique. Now, he has more of a blocky build. And when it comes to playing tennis, I believe that a thinner build typically is going to be the best suited, right? If you look at the best players in the world, you have Federer, Djokovic. Nadal has some muscle, but he's more wiry, and Sampras. Just because you're strong doesn't translate into a powerful serve or powerful ground strokes. All right, so let's take a look at this gentleman. And we can see here that he also has some decent form. He has a racket drop. He keeps his left arm up. We worked on that, keeping his left arm up just a little bit longer. We worked on getting his body weight into the serve. And you can see he has a nice racket drop. He comes up, he does a little bit of pronation and follows through. And I would give him somewhere about 90 to 105 miles an hour, perhaps, because he has some balls that do hit into the fence on one bounce. But someone like him, he might, 90, 95 miles an hour consistently, he may have expectations of serving in the hundreds. Again, we got to curb those expectations, because you're going to reach a point where you can only serve at that speed and no more. So once you develop good technique and you get to that place, we want to go for consistency and placement in the serve. That becomes crucial. Now let's look at this last gentleman. Now this man has a pretty decent serve. I had taught him pronation, and we worked on the racket drop. And you can see it's not ideal. He doesn't have a flowing serve. He kind of just drops it into the racket drop, but he does come up and he does pronate very nicely, and he tries to get his weight forward. He never truly achieved an accurate serve. We didn't work long enough, but I was happy with the progress that we made from the beginning stages. I wish I could show you at the very beginning to this point, which is not bad. And he is fairly athletic, although out of shape, but he is fairly athletic. He used to play baseball, so it always helps. If you played baseball or you played football, you're actually going to do better with the pronation and the tossing movement. So bottom line, what does this mean for you? It means you got to take into account your body, your size, your age, your gender, your athleticism. You cannot expect, what you really should do, what I would recommend is take a radar gun, forget about technique for a second, and just hit your hardest serve, however you serve, okay? Take a look at that number. That number is the number that you want to eventually get to. You want to get there with like 60%, 70% of your serves going in, right? Because usually when we try to hit the ball as hard as we can, right, the ball rarely ever goes in. So that's something to work at, right? So if I could blast that ball at 108 miles an hour, I want to work up towards averaging about 108 miles an hour on my first serve. That would be a great place to be. So when I hit my serve, I have kind of a different serve. I have more of an abbreviated serve motion, which I want to make a whole video on the abbreviated serve. But I learned this from a coach about 10 years ago. And it really cuts out, it's like, I call it cutting out the middleman or the beginning, because you don't have to go through all of this. We just start right here. This is how I start my serve, and you just toss and go through a racket drop and hit the ball. Now, with me, I don't really have a great racket drop. I never had that great flexibility with my elbow, but I'm still able to achieve really high speeds on my serve. When I say really high for a club player, maybe up to the 110 range. I have really good snapping. I used to pitch, and I do pronate and I do come forward, so that does help. And when I hit my serve and it goes in, I mean, it's a pure ace, which is a great feeling. But I need to be a little bit more consistent on my serve. I'm always working on it, and so can you. So I hope you enjoyed this video and you got something out of it. Go out there and practice your serve. Don't worry so much about the pace. Worry more about the placement and the accuracy, and you will slowly build up the pace. I'm Chad for Winning Tennis. Please subscribe, help support the channel, and give me a like. Thank you.